think it's really important to pay attention to what's happening right now in the United States, and I have a lot of people that I care about and love that I feel could be victimized by what's happening. So I think it's important to get together with other people that might feel the same way as you and to band together.
I am very interested in the two speakers tonight, the Department of Interior National Park Service person as well as the governor, and I'm very interested to hear how they're going to approach this administration's challenges.
No, I'm a part of the Democratic Party here. My name's on the back of this, so thought we would show up and show our support for the governor and for the party. We need to remove the evil dictator who's trying to take over our government.
Donald Trump, and I don't like what he's doing to this country.
Wanting to connect more with the Walla Walla community, wanting to learn more, wanting to become more knowledgeable, wanting to have more awareness of what's going on socially and politically.
I'm here to support community and people, and it's all about us, not them.
I'm interested to see how the community is doing from a democratic process, and excited to see the governor.
I've decided to become more involved, and I'm checking it out.
Well, I come from Generation Z. I was born in 2004. A lot of things I see with my generation is that my generation will complain about our political system and about our economy and about all these other things, and yet they all just sit behind their phone and complain about it. They don't do anything. So I'm here so that way I can participate and actually get involved, because I plan on actually running for Washington State Governor when I'm old enough, which I currently am because I'm 20, but I need to get involved, and I need to show that I actually want to get involved. Everyone talks about getting involved, but no one actually does it, so that's why I'm here.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Don't sit down, stay in line. You know, do what you have to do. Well, we're going to get started here, and I want to welcome everybody and express my deep appreciation for everybody being here. It far exceeded our expectations to have so many wonderful, wonderful people here at our dinner. Thank you for the music, yeah. Maybe if they could turn the internet back on, we'd all be good too. Well, welcome to the first annual Power of Community Gathering, where we celebrate community, encourage action for greater good, and are inspired. I'm Carrie Isaacson, I'm chair of the Walla Walla County Democratic Party. Thank you. I'll be your moderator tonight as we hear from Washington's amazing leaders, each of whom is an outstanding individual. And our keynote speaker brings a national perspective about issues vital to all of us. I know you might know, I hope you know, we sold out twice. We really had no idea. First at 250, then we opened it up to 300, and we maxed out, and then we had a waiting list. So thank you again. This is the first major gathering of the party since COVID. We are coming together at a critical time. And on the one hand, we're focused on a bright future for Washington and Walla Walla. And on the other hand, we have to acknowledge the serious crisis our country is in. We have to resist the damage being done to democracy and our communities coming out of our nation's capital. You will hear both sides, the good things we're going to do in the future together, and also how we're going to be resisting, protesting, and fighting every inch of the way the damage being done out of Washington. I'm very, very happy to introduce Bob Ferguson, our governor, and Amy Schwab, our port commissioner. will be introducing Bob formally. Thank you.
First, the adjustment of the microphone. It's a rite of passage. Good evening. It's amazing to see such a wonderful crowd here tonight. So thank you all for coming. I want to start by acknowledging that we gather on the traditional lands of the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla. People who stewarded this land for countless generations. We honor their enduring connection to this land and acknowledge their past, present, and future contributions to our community. We commit to listening, learning, and acting to support tribal sovereignty and preserve their cultures and traditions. I encourage all of you to join me in that commitment. So I'm chair of the committee that organized this event, so anything that didn't work, it's my fault. So we just get that out of the way right away. So tonight we recognize the power of community and remind you that it's up to us, to each of us, working together to realize that power. The power of organized action through our Democratic Party. The power of community is so much more than protesting, just casting a ballot, or gathering in a hotel room on an odd Wednesday evening to remind ourselves that we're not alone. It's the power of everyday organized action through the political process, through our two-party system. It's the power of collective action locally and at the larger state and federal levels. It's about showing up, using our voices to ensure that our party, our political leaders, and our government are guided by our values. Lately, I've heard many poorly informed opinions on what Democrats are or are not doing. And I'm saddened to say that many who protest what is being done in this country do not feel safe to be identified publicly as Democrats. When Carrie invited me to get involved in the party, I told her my goal was to work to make it safe to be a Democrat in Walla Walla County. And in the last week, that's taken on a whole new meaning. I know that history suggests that an out Democrat can't be elected to a county-wide position. When I ran for the Port of Walla Walla, I didn't highlight my involvement in the party because, frankly, economic development is not a partisan issue. As you know, I was elected by a wide margin to be the first female identifying commissioner in that board's 70-year history. And now, it's time to publicly take a stand as a proud Democrat. I do this not to be safe, but because I know that change only comes through organized effort. While I do not serve on the Port of Walla Walla Commission as a Democrat, I am proud to be known as a Democrat serving my community on the Port of Walla Walla Commission. Until our community leaders who embrace the values of our Democratic Party can stand publicly with our party, our communities cannot recognize that it is indeed the Democratic Party values that guide those leaders. Without speaking out, our community can't recognize that we are the party of good governance and sound fiscal stewardship that care for our communities and the environment that support us. But now for the first highlight of our evening. It is my honor and privilege to welcome Governor Bob Ferguson back to Walla Walla, now as our 24th governor of the great state of Washington. Governor Ferguson is a fourth-generation Washingtonian, son of a public school teacher and a Boeing employee, and with his wife Colleen, is a proud parent of teenage twins. Oh Lord. Governor Ferguson has spent his career in public service standing up to powerful interests that don't play by the rules, fighting for civil rights, and achieving victories for Washington families. He is an internationally rated chess player. That's the guy I want to have do strategy for us. He's an avid mountain climber, and boy, we got mountains to climb, and backpacker, and an enthusiastic softball dad. And we are absolutely delighted to welcome him back to Walla Walla. Welcome, Governor Ferguson.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you so much, everybody. I came all the way from Seattle to ask you a couple questions. Are you ready to defend your democracy? Yes! And are you fired up about the protests that went on last weekend? Yes! And maybe the most important question, are you ready to help me defeat Congressman Baumgartner next year? More about him in a minute. But first, join me in a big round of applause for the two people we just heard speak, to both Carrie and Amy, for their service and also for organizing this amazing event. Give them and all the volunteers. It's true, they kept opening up more parts of this room until they couldn't open up anymore. It kept filling up. So I guess this is the first annual, but let me know, I'd be happy to come back next year. We do it all over again. Like this is great. I've had a great visit in Walla Walla. I went to the Sweets game last night and saw them. They lost, but it was fun to be out there. And I've got some connections to Walla Walla. I'm one of 7 kids, and I've got mostly older siblings, but my one little brother lives here in Walla Walla. And he's been, in his life, he's been kind of a rolling stone, goes to a place, stays for a year or two, moves to another one. He came to Walla Walla, I think 12 years ago or so, and he hasn't left. I realize this is where he's got his roots, and you know why, right? It's such a beautiful, beautiful part of our country and of our state. So it was great to see him last night, and had a great day here at the series of meetings. The family connections to Walla Walla might be growing deeper. My twins, Jack and Katie, who you mentioned, they're going to be seniors in high school next year. So they were on their spring break. They came out here to visit Whitman, and so. I know that my son Jack in particular seems very excited about Whitman. It remains to be seen how excited Whitman is about Jack. We'll see how that process develops. So he's optimistic, but we'll find out. But it's great to be out here. First, maybe I can just start with 2 words, honestly, and that is just thank you. I campaigned for governor, spent 18 months on the campaign trail. Went to 39 counties, and we really won a decisive victory, double-digit victory over a challenging opponent. And I decided to run for governor. For many years I've not accepted campaign contributions from large corporations or corporate PACs, which is unusual. Thank you. Yeah. And so when I met with my political team as we were planning my campaign for governor, you got to raise a little bit more running for governor than you do for attorney general. And the team said, we got to raise 15 million bucks. And they said, let's talk about your pledge not to take money from large corporations. We need to revisit that. And I said, no, I really don't want to change it. They said, well, we got to raise 15 million bucks. You tell me how we're going to do it. And they literally said, if we want to raise that amount of money, it's going to require more than 100,000 individuals to make donations, right? Because you get a max check for 4,800 bucks from a big corporation. If you want to match that with donations, someone help me the math, but you need like 96 people to give 50 bucks each, I think. Our state treasurer's here, he can help me out, but you get the idea. You need a lot of individuals making a donation. And so I just said, look, we need to try and do that. Like, I just really want to communicate it's a grassroots, people-powered campaign, that we can do that even running for governor. And with your help, we did it with 120,000 plus donations from individuals all across the state. So we asked around, turns out I'm the only governor in the country that does not take those donations. Our state treasurer doesn't take those donations, and you can be successful with your help. So thanks to each and every one of you for making that happen. Now, I did mention my kids earlier, and I think Amy and Carrie, you were talking about what's going on at the national level, and I've got some thoughts about that, which I will share. And first, my son Jack, who's an avid reader, he reads all the time. And I noticed about a month or so ago, I'm always curious what book is on his bedstand, what he's reading. He's a big history kid. And so about a month ago, I noticed the book he was reading is a book called How Democracies Die. It was written, I think, during Trump's first term, if I recall correctly. And it's paraphrasing it probably poorly, but the idea is that looking at democracies in the 20th century that have perished, it's not because of some big coup that happens from a military, right? It's rather, instead, quite the opposite. It's a slow, gradual, yet steady erosion of a free press, of the judicial system, of a gathering authoritarianism that slowly but surely, almost you're not paying attention, but the next thing you know, you wake up and your country's not the democracy that it once was. I'm not sure if this sounds familiar to you, but that's what the book is. And it struck me so much that, when I was 17, I can assure you, beyond a shadow of doubt, I was thinking many things, but not on my list was the fact that the democracy I was living in might die. That was not on my bingo card, okay, as a 17-year-old kid. It wasn't as a 27-year-old, a 37-year-old, a 47-year-old, right? It's only recently that I've come to realize I can't take that for granted. And, I think it says something that our kids, our young people, understand what's at stake. And, that is why, I just so am determined to do whatever I can as your governor to defend that democracy. And we have a lot of work to do, but one thing I want to communicate to you, as challenging as the situation is, and look, when you have a situation when a U.S. Senator from California goes into a press conference of a cabinet member to ask a question and identifies himself, and then is abruptly escorted, to put it very delicately, right, out of that room and thrown down on the ground and handcuffed. If that's what's happening when cameras are rolling to a U.S. Senator from California, imagine what is happening that we don't see when someone who's not as powerful as a U.S. Senator, someone who does not have cameras rolling. That is deeply disturbing. When you see individuals who are masked, you cannot see their faces, picking up students on the streets and putting them in the car and whisking them away. When you see no due process for individuals who are sent to countries they are not from. So what is happening is truly dark, it is. What I want to also communicate, though, as challenging as that is, there is no better state taking on the Trump administration than Washington State. That's a fact. That's a fact. And I realize that's a bold statement, but I'm going to prove it to you with two examples, okay? In 2017, when Donald Trump was first president, the first state to take on Donald Trump in court, I was your attorney general back then, so I remember it well. The first state to take him on in court and the first state to beat him was Washington State. We were first and got it done. And in 2025, once again, the first state to take him on in court and the first state to beat him once again in court was Washington State again, doing it again. And the way we're doing that is by a lot of hard work and a lot of preparation and being thoughtful about what we do. We have a lot of folks in the AG's office who work extremely hard to make sure we're defending your civil rights, defending our environment, right? Defending our economy, right? All those things are going on in the AG's office and certainly in my office as well. So one thing I want to coordinate is, as you know, when you see a headline and you're outraged by it, I just want you to know there's a lot of hardworking people out there in state government who are channeling that outrage into action, okay? Over and over and over again. That's important. I definitely want you to know that. That said, it's going to be challenging, and that's why we need everybody's participation. Whatever our station is in life, I thank God every day I happen to be a governor, where I have an outsized role. And I thank God I was Attorney General when he was president before. And I could challenge him in court over and over again. By the way, our final record in those 4 years, we beat Donald Trump in court 58 times and lost just 3 times. Not too bad, right? Not too bad. But we need you all to be engaged in this fight, right? We need everyone to be engaged, whatever that is, a protest, alert of the editor, sharing on your social media networks what's going on, right? But it is outrageous what's happening, and more the comptroller in New York, who I know is a friend and colleague of our state treasurer, who was arrested for somebody trying to escort someone out of a hearing. Like, it's incredible. If you've not watched the video, check it out. His spouse, who was there, her name's Meg Barnett, who had a press conference afterwards when her husband was arrested. He's the comptroller running for mayor of New York, was my law school classmate back at New York University. I mean, this is incredible. This is happening to elected officials, and you can imagine what that means for the rest of us, right? So we all need to speak out in one voice in whatever form we can in order to push back. And look, in the chaos of this administration, I could go on all night, so I will not. But as a couple examples, right, the tariffs, just to pick an example. We are a trade-dependent state, arguably the most trade-dependent state in the country, right? Our workers, right, and our businesses depend on having that trade. And yet these tariffs, they're so damn chaotic, right? One day it's this, the next day it's that. And one thing I hear over and over and over from businesses across the state is the one thing they need is certainty. The one thing they need is predictability, right? So they can budget accordingly, they can plan accordingly. We're getting the exact opposite of that from this administration. So one thing we did is there's a court case challenging that the president overstepped his authority with those tariffs. I put together a coalition of businesses, labor, community leaders all across our state to file a brief with the federal court to articulate what the harm would be to our state if these tariffs, the chaos of these tariffs, are allowed to go forward with the president unilaterally making this decision without the help of Congress. That's how we articulate the challenges that we're facing. One more example I'll give you. Our state budget, which has its own challenges, but our state budget, we receive about 28% of our budget comes from the federal government. We're not unique among states across the country, but about 28% of our budget is federal dollars. So to give you a couple of examples, K through 12 education, right? About 7 or 8% of our K through 12 budget comes from the federal government, okay? Public health. You can imagine all these different areas that are tremendously supported by the federal government. Let's get to Congressman Baumgartner for a moment. That big, awful, terrible budget bill, right? In that bill that the House passed and that Congressman Baumgartner voted for are cuts to Medicaid. And cuts to Medicaid is putting it very, very charitably. Billions and billions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid, which will result in millions of Americans losing access to health care coverage. And what are they going to do with those savings? Tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. It's been referred to as the greatest transfer of wealth, the greatest transfer of wealth in US history, to take those resources from the lowest income folks and move it over to tax breaks for the wealthy. It's outrageous. As an example of what that would mean for Washington State, our initial numbers means that's a $2 billion hit to Washington State, because guess what? Most of the money that we spend on Medicaid comes from the federal government. Most of it does. This county, huge percentage of folks are on Medicaid in this county. I was at a meeting earlier today. I went to do a tour of the veterans home here in Walla Walla, which is, by the way, an amazing facility. It really is. The workers there, the facility, top class. I mean, really top class. And I had a chance to talk to veterans there who are deeply appreciative of that facility and the workers who work hard there. But when we were talking, one of the veterans raised his hand and talked about Medicaid. He says, I'm on Medicaid. What's going to happen to me? You know, can you promise me, right, that I'll still have access? I can't make that promise, right? We're gonna do the best we can, but that's what we're dealing with. And Congressman Baumgartner, he voted for it. He voted for it. And so look, I know you may get tired of writing to him, but please write to him again. Please call to him again, because it's gonna come back to the House. The Senate's not agreeing, it's going back to the House. And every group I meet with, I encourage them to reach out on the east part of the state to Congressman Newhouse and Congressman Baumgartner, right? So depending on which district you're in, but write to them and explain to them what that harm would be. And Medicaid is just one of many examples. But the stakes are extremely high, and we all have a voice. We all have a voice in this, and we all need to use that voice. Finally, as I wrap up, we of course have to push back about what's going on at the federal government. But it's just as important that we here in Washington State offer an alternative, right? We have to show a government that works, right? How a government grapples with budget challenges. We've done that here in Washington State. We balanced our budget, something the federal government doesn't do. We balanced our budget, at the same time increasing our investment in K through 12 education, right? Supporting our educators, supporting our students. I'm the son, my late mother was a public school teacher, as was mentioned. She taught special education in our public schools for many years, in addition, by the way, to raising 7 kids, 6 boys. So there's a special place in heaven for anybody who does that, I mean, right? To be clear, that's a saint by any definition. But we increased our investments in special education. We increased our investments in supporting law enforcement, hiring more law enforcement officers. We dramatically increased our investments in more housing. When I campaigned for governor, the issue I heard the most in campaigning in all 39 counties was the need for more affordable housing. We need to provide that all across the state. Thankfully, the legislature, we work together. I must assign 22 bills to streamline our processes, make it easier to build more affordable housing. A big investment in public-private partnerships to build that affordable housing. That's how you show government that works, right? Standing up for your veterans, standing up for educators, standing up for more housing, standing up for working people. That's what we need to do. We got to push back against what's happening at the federal level, but we need to offer our vision as well for a government that works. So just as I wrap up, I just want to kind of come back to where I started, which is thank you so much for your support. I can't be successful running my campaign, right, without individuals who are out there putting up the yard signs, making the phone calls, writing a $25 check. That literally is how the campaign works. It's a people-powered operation. And I just find it so inspiring to come here to Walla Walla and see this entire room. Each time I got an update from you guys, it's like, hey, we're adding another room to this event, right? More people are coming. And so this enthusiasm, the excitement you have, the energy you have, that helps me, that helps our state treasurer, that helps all of our elected officials. All the work you're doing for Democrats up and down the ballot, for Amy, right? That energy, we just got to translate it into action over and over again. If we do that, we'll get through these next 3.5 years and we'll make our country even better because of it. Thank you so much, everybody.
I contact Baumgartner all the time. He sends me stuff like just gaslighting, unbelievable. And I wrote to him a lot about NPR and PBS, and he sent me a response that said, you know, he just loves Masterpiece Theater. But the educated rich people watch these things and listen to the radio, and they should be supporting it. Yeah, I got a lot of these, and he's only been in office for a few months. So thank you, Governor Ferguson, very much. You know, we are here to be inspired, and certainly we were inspired by Governor Ferguson. And I'm inspired because among us, we have some wonderful local elected officials here in Walla Walla County. And I want to ask you to please hold your applause until I name everybody. And I'm very proud tonight to reintroduce Amy Schwab. Stand up, Amy, who's our Port Commissioner. We have Bertha Clayton, the County Commissioner. We have Gustavo Reyna and Jeffrey Robinson, City of Walla Walla. We have the elected mayor of College Place, Norma Hernandez. We have Derek Sarley, the chair of the Walla Walla Public Schools Board. Where are you, Derek? There he is. Hello, Derek. And we're very proud to have one of the two student representatives of the Walla Walla School Board here, and that's Ari Kim Levitt. Ari, where are you? We're also honored to have Amanda Brown, chair of the Pasco City, or I should say School Board, Pasco School Board. Thank you, Amanda. I'm proud also to make some more people stand up here. I'd like to introduce to you the party's executive board, and that's Mark Thompson. Stand up, Mark, Vice Chair. Amy Schwab, Vice Chair. Jan Korn. Craig Woodard. Susan Todd. There she is. Tim Copeland, and Jeff Strickler. And now will all the PCOs stand up? Everybody here who's a PCO, a precinct officer, stand up. Stand up, we can't do it without you. Finally, I would like the members of the Finance Committee, the Events Committee, who put this on tonight, stand up. Thank you very much for all your hard work. Thank you again. I am proud that we and many other volunteers have actually created a very robust county party. We have a year-round presence downtown, which took a lot of searching and a lot of fundraising, but we have it, and it's truly paid off. We have a year-round presence to support year-round education and organizing. The new national head of the DNC said that that's what we need to do. We're not going to just fire up during campaign season every 2 years. We have to organize year-round. And I wanted to say, got it covered, we're doing it. You have all made what we do possible. Communication, fundraising, candidate recruitment, voter education, a county level platform outlining our positions, it's on your table, and community activism, protests and demonstrations. We began in the spring of 2022 with the demonstration and candlelight vigil to protest Putin's invasion of Ukraine. We were downtown. We had a lot of people there. And then our most recent action last Saturday at the most wonderful No Kings. Who all was there? Fantastic. You know, we did not organize that. We helped, but it was organized by the wonderful Walla Walla Activism Network. And Nora Marie, you're key to that, and she's back there in the corner. Why are we so committed to being Democrats when we live in an area and at a time when the majority is the other party? Well, there's many different reasons, but bottom line, we share a commitment to democracy and the rule of law, and to making sure there's true opportunity for the good life and freedom to everyone. We recognize that none of us got to where we are by ourselves. We had the support of family and community, have publicly supported programs to give us the skills to achieve, and an environment in which to do so. A robust economy and a financial system that is fair. I hate to say was fair, but is fair to consumers and businesses alike, where property rights are protected. I don't think people understand that the rule of law comes all down to respecting one's property rights. We do all of this by standing up for democracy together. And you have to consider that the Democratic Party is the largest and strongest organized opposition to the current administration. The two major parties at this time are baked into our system. This is changing as we speak, of course. Everything is a bit in flux. But the time to be a Democrat and come together is now. There's a saying, and I can't believe I'm quoting Rumsfeld, but I am. You know, that you go to war with the army you have, not with the one that's perfect or the one that you want. Democrats and liberals have been demonized for decades. We shrug this off, we persevere, knowing that nearly for 100 years, we have been the party of fiscal responsibility and strong economies. Yes. We're big on pay as you go, not debt. Of expanding civil rights. We are the party of the social safety net, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, agricultural support programs to ensure a stable food supply, a strong military and public safety under civilian control rather than the other way around. We support and care for our veterans. We protect and expand the franchise to vote. You know, the women got the right to vote in 1919 under a Democratic president. Again, leading the way. We're protecting one's rights to bear arms while continuing to address the violence caused by military-grade weapons. We support scientific research, including biomedical research, quality public education for all, freedom of religion and freedom from religion, and much more. In Walla Walla, we welcome everyone. We as a party are working hard to reach out to as many people and groups as possible. We will work with anyone who shares our values and goals, regardless of their party or political persuasion. Independents, Republicans, Democratic Socialists of America, people who say they don't care about politics. It doesn't apply to them. We want to engage them and work with them. We are all coming together, we have to combat the erosion of our country. I didn't mean to go on because I'm not a keynote speaker, but thank you for listening to me. Hey, right now, I wish Nick Brown was here. When I was running for office last year, I got to campaign alongside of him, and he is truly an impressive person. But we have a video greeting from Nick Brown, our current Attorney General, who's carrying on a lot of the tradition that Bob Ferguson did as Attorney General. And let's show that right now.
Hey everybody, this is Attorney General Nick Brown. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be with you this evening in Walla Walla to celebrate the power of community. But I wanted to take just a minute to say hello and to thank you for your support, and also to talk about all of the incredible work that's been happening in the Attorney General's office. I'm really proud of our team and all of the people in the People's Law Firm to make sure that we are defending Washingtonians from threats big and small. And in my first 5 months in office, that has meant pushing back against the Trump administration and making sure that we defend the rule of law, truth, and justice here in Washington. And thus far, in the first 5 months, we've brought 22 lawsuits against the Trump administration, making sure that we are protecting funding to Washington, making sure that we are protecting our voting system, the Department of Education, healthcare, freedoms and liberties in this state, and really at its essence about what it means to be an American. But I can assure you that Washington was ready for this moment. A lot of credit is due to Attorney General Ferguson, now Governor Ferguson, making sure that Washington and all of the people in our office We're ready to do this work and to meet this challenge. That has meant a lot of research, a lot of collaboration with our other Attorney General's offices across the country. But time and time again, we have been winning. And the courts are so important in this moment to make sure that we protect everyone in this state and everyone in this country from the lawlessness that we're seeing in DC. But really, at the end of the day, the most important thing is each of you and everyone in the community doing the right thing in their communities, protecting their friends and neighbors, telling the truth when it matters, because we will survive this moment, but we need to make sure that we continue to work for progress in this state. We continue to work to improve the lives and safety of everyone in this state. And I'm so honored to be in this position, but I know that it takes all of us moving forward in the right direction to ensure that we continue to make this the best possible place to live in the country. So thank you again for giving me a minute. I wish I could be there, but I look forward to meeting with all of you.
That's it. You should know that Nick was from Steilacoom, and that Nick graduated from Morehouse, Harvard Law School. He was a vet. ROTC helped get him through college, he says. He got the Bronze Star for his work in Iraq. And he was Governor Inslee's attorney when he was governor. And then he was U.S. Attorney. I mean, he's got just an amazing background, and we're very lucky to have him as Attorney General. So now I'm turning to our State Treasurer. Hello, Mike. Happy you are here. Thank you for coming. So now I'm going to brag on our State Treasurer and his background. It's Mike Pellicetti, and he's the state's CFO. He's our Chief Financial Officer, managing our state's investments, debt, and cash. The Treasurer is independently elected. The office also manages $42 billion in state investments and the state government's operating cash and local government investment pool. He's got a very important policy role too in legislation and in regulations in advising and its financial impact. This is really cool. Mike was a state legislator from the 30th LD here in Washington from 2017 to 21, and he had flipped a Republican district. In fact, his election gave the Democrats the majority for that term. His undergrad degree is from Alfred University. He received a master's in rural development from Brandon University in Canada on a Fulbright, and his law degree is from Gonzaga. And he clerked for Charles Johnson on the Washington Supreme Court. He's also been a prosecuting attorney, and he does reject all corporate contributions to his campaign. So I saw Mike at the state committee meeting in Tacoma about a month ago, and he was just so fantastic, and he has been here before, and I asked him, well, you gotta come, and he very graciously said yes. So Mike, please come and share your message.
Walla Walla Democrats, how you doing tonight? You can do better than that. Walla Walla Democrats, how are you doing tonight? Look, it is so good to see all of you. I was in the neighborhood. Actually, I was in Mill Creek about 5 hours ago. I don't know if anyone knows where Mill Creek is. I was in Snohomish County. I was just figured I'd pass on through Walla Walla on the way back to Federal Way tomorrow. No, look, it is so good to see all of you, as Cara's pointing out. It's so great to be back here in Walla Walla. It is so good to feel the energy in this room. How does it feel to have 300 friends here telling you you're not the only Democrat in this area? There's been a lot going on lately. I don't know if you've noticed. But there's a lot going on in the world, and I will tell you, there are times like you, I wake up in the morning, bring out the phone, see what's going on CNN or whatever, New York Times, and I'm like, oh man, just get me through a day. Get me through a day where I'm not getting shocked with something awful, and this week has been particularly awful. I'll speak on behalf of other elected officials as well. dealing with everything, just the tragedy that we saw in Minnesota. You know, as the governor was pointing out, my good close colleague arrested yesterday in New York City, the city controller of New York, Brad Lander. You know, these are particularly tough times. And it's actually moments like this, and it's why it's so important for me to join all of you tonight, is because you serve as a source of energy for me and make it so that I, like all of you, know that we are not alone in this, that truly we are growing. I spoke to the Clark County Democrats at their annual dinner on Saturday. It was nice to see about 300 of them there as well. And as was pointed out by Kari, the thousands who came together all across this state, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that came together across this state, here in Walla Walla, in Tacoma, and Seattle, and everywhere in between, to say enough is enough. And so I have a question for you. Are you ready to politically fight back against this reckless, inept, self-serving presidential administration? Look, in the Office of State Treasurer, we've been preparing for this since last August. And I hate to say it, because there's a lot of other things I'd rather be doing. But I remember telling the folks in the Office of State Treasurer at the time, I said, you know, back in August, I said, you know, we need to start preparing for the possibility of another Trump administration. And the possibility of the unlawful withholding of federal dollars from the state of Washington. The unlawful withholding of federal dollars from the state of Washington. And I remember telling my team at the time, I said, I hope this is the biggest colossal waste of time the Office of the State Treasurer ever spends on any issue in this office. But unfortunately, it's been some of the most efficient and helpful time that we could possibly spend on an issue. So when the President of the United States decided to unlawfully withhold all federal dollars from the state of Washington and every other state on January 28th, we were ready. Because we had spent months at that point working with, you know, I reached out to the Biden White House, their White House budget office. I started working with the then Attorney General Bob Ferguson at the time, and started to prepare for every eventuality that we might see related to that unlawful withholding of federal funds. So on January 28th, after I and others had spent months connecting with state treasurers in every corner of the state, every corner of the country, we actually had the evidence and the material ready, with great partnership with the governor and the attorney general, to have our lawsuit and the evidence necessary to show that the unlawful action on January 28th could not stand. And within 48 hours, a federal judge in Rhode Island overturned the White House's effort to withhold federal dollars from our state and every other state of the country. But we haven't stopped there, because, you know, we just heard from the governor about a month ago. The governor and I, as well as other elected officials around the state, partnered to bring forward a legal briefing to respond to the unlawful tariffs and reckless tariffs that have been imposed around the country. And the U.S. Court of International Trade, just about 4 weeks ago, followed our legal reasoning and put an immediate order against those tariffs. And give that a round of applause too, because while we have a ways to go on that litigation, because it's obviously being appealed and there's a way to go, what it tells you is we will continue to prepare and continue to be ready and continue to have the actions necessary to fight for the interests of the people of the state of Washington. And tariffs in particular is something that I've really focused on. I've been here in the Tri-Cities. I've been here, well, not here in the Tri-Cities. I've been in the Tri-Cities. I've been in Central and Eastern Washington numerous times, talking about the impact of tariffs and the reckless way they've been imposed, and how they will affect our farming community, how they will affect both and squeeze farmers on both the supply side and on their ability to maintain their continued business. And I think it's important that we continue to highlight all these issues and continue to be prepared in the way we are on these financial issues. But I also want to talk about how Washington is leading the way on economic issues. Because just 3 weeks ago, U.S. News and World Report, for the second year in a row, rated Washington State #1 in the nation for long-term fiscal stability. #1 in the nation. And as of about 3 weeks ago, our credit ratings here in the state of Washington, which is like our personal credit score for a state, is now stronger than the federal government's for the first time in history. So So don't let anyone tell you, as Scar was pointing out, don't let anyone tell you for a second, Democrats are not the party of fiscal responsibility. We're leading the way and showing how it's done here in the state of Washington. But I also can't sugarcoat it for you. We have challenges on the horizon, including economic challenges coming our way. The reckless economic handling by this administration is going to continue to put strains on everyday Washingtonians and everyday Americans. And it's going to take every bit of financial strength, all that financial strength we have to weather what's coming. But I will say this, and I truly mean it. I would rather be Washington State than any other state in the union as we address these issues. And there will continue to be further efforts by the administration to withhold dollars from the state of Washington. We know that. But here is the deal with it. This is why we are so prepared and why we continue to prepare on this, because the reality is we just heard from the governor. The governor mentioned 50-some times as Attorney General he sued the administration. Hardly ever lost. Do you know how many times the President Trump at the time during that first term mentioned Bob Ferguson in a tweet? 0. Not once. There was a lot to talk about. Not once. Because he doesn't like to shine a light on losing. He sure doesn't like losing to Washington State. Not once did he mention Bob Ferguson in a tweet. Because here's the deal with our president. You know, when he tries to throw a punch, and he'll throw a punch, we know that. If he throws a punch and misses, he'll pretend like he was never in the boxing ring in the first place. Right? He'll be like, Washington State, withhold money from Washington State? I hardly know Washington State. What's Washington State? Right? Where's Washington State? Hardly know Washington State. You know, but that's why we have to continue to be prepared, and that is why I also want to point out for all the outrageous things that are taking place. You know, you see it every day. You see it, I see it. We open up our email, we're like, what outrageous thing is happening today? I want you to continue to call that out. But I want you to always add a line with it, which is this outrageous thing that is happening, this unlawful thing that is happening, is being done to hide the president's failures on economic policies. Every time. The more chaotic it gets, the more outrageous it gets. It is because he is trying to deflect from the reality that his economic policies are failing. Do not let him get away with it for a second. Call it out every time. And, you know, here's also the challenge that we face as Democrats, is we feel things. And we are dealing with, I gotta speak truth, a narcissistic administration that does not. But we feel when SNAP benefits deny and create hungry children, when they deny access to school lunches. We feel that. We feel when Medicaid benefits are denied, and because of that, people's health's at risk and people die. As Democrats, we feel that. And we feel it when dedicated public servants are assassinated because of harmful rhetoric and propaganda. We feel that. But what I'm asking you to do is to not internalize it. I know it's easy for me to say, but we have to externalize it into action. Because no human can, when you do feel that, can continue to take that on. After a while, we feel limits. We feel like, how could we possibly go on any further? We just need to tune out, check out, stop turning on the news. That is a normal reaction to anyone with a loving spirit. We've all been there. But that's what he wants. I am telling you, as you mentioned that I was a former prosecutor. I prosecuted sex traffickers. Let me tell you. Well, give him a round of applause. Yeah, no, it's on the right side of the issue, let me tell you. But I'll tell you, you want to talk about narcissists. People trafficking people, pimps, folks doing that stuff, they don't feel it. What they do is they create chaos. They create uncertainty, they create fear, and they want you to check out and kind of give up. And that's what happens. When you deal with those type of trafficking, people are like, well, you weren't chained, why didn't you leave? We didn't leave because you've been conditioned, you've been beaten down over a period of time. I am telling you, when you internalize that, that will continue to wear away at you. We must externalize it into action. That is the path. That is what he does not want us to do. And as the governor is pointing out, and I feel the same way, there are a lot of things we used to be able to take for granted. Democracy, functional government, checks showing up from the federal government to the state on the date they were supposed to. Right, things we should be able to take for granted, but the reality is we need to be prepared to make sure that we collectively bring the energy and are the folks that make it so that we can get our country back on track. And there's also the reality that we're seeing a lot of it playing out. Tools of fascism lead to fascism. But it takes our tools of democracy to make sure that we save our democracy in our country. There is that old saying, right? May you live in interesting times. This is about as interesting as they get. And there's always been that sense of what would I do in moments of history? Well, I'm telling you, you're looking at it. But what I can tell you is you are doing what needs to be done in this moment. Number one, show up. Number two, engage. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep speaking out. The harder it gets, the more important it is to continue to engage on these issues. That is the path forward. That is what is going to allow us to move forward and to know that you are on the right side of history. Because as we continue to show up, organize, stay active with the Democratic Party, make sure we're showing up to events, plugging in, volunteering, following the leadership here to find out ways to engage. That is the path forward. There's not going to be a Calvary. You're looking at it, folks. You're looking at it. But what I can tell you is you are on the right side of history. And you are going to look back on this, and when people say, oh, there wasn't much going on, I never really supported President Trump, it wasn't a big thing. It's no, you're I was there. I remember what was happening, and I remember showing up at the Walla Walla County Democrats, and there were 300 people there ready to go. So I guess what I will say is, I was mentioning earlier that the chaos that's brought, the uncertainty that's brought. We have a divider in chief. And that's what he's good at. Remember the show? Remember that show? It was on The Apprentice? It had the D-list celebrities up there. They were friends by the time they were over with an episode. They hated each other. They were fighting with each other, pushing each other against, right? That's what folks do to create instability, because that's the only way somebody like that becomes a centralizing, unifying force. They want to create chaos. He's done that with the Republican Party. He's divided the Republican Party. Rhinos, split them aside. They're not real conservatives. Did it with our country between Democrats and Republicans. I know you all have been there. It's hard to talk to relatives. That wasn't the case a decade ago. It is part of a strategy. But what is important to point out is that for all the Americans who voted in the last election, a majority of those American voters did not vote for our president. I don't want there to be confusion. He won, right? Don't let there be any confusion about that. But a majority of American voters who voted for folks other than President Trump. And the only way that we don't change course is if we as Democrats are no longer united. And that's what he is going to want to do. He will want to continue to divide, separate, and exclude within the Democratic Party. Put wedges in there that will force that to happen. So I have a question for you. Are you ready to stay united as the Democratic Party to save our country? Are you ready to keep working day in and day out to make sure we do what we need to do as a country? And are you ready to politically and legally fight with me to make sure we bring back our country and move our country forward? My name is Mike Pelliciotti. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all you're doing.
You're on, Mark. Now, this is Mark Thompson, who was our first vice chair and PCO, and he's going to introduce our keynote speaker, Chuck Sams.
Thank you. Before I introduce Chuck, I want to issue one more challenge to you. This was a real challenge putting this together. I was on Amy's committee, and they did a tremendous job. But you know, in January, February, we thought we might have 60 to 100 people. And then we kind of threw out a challenge that let's make this a community event. Let's invite friends, let's invite neighbors. And I know that's risky because you're kind of divulging your personal value. But if you can't do it now, when are you going to do it? And this is the result of it. So I thank you very much. The other thing I want to mention very quickly is I see some of my fellow high school friends and teammates, and we're kind of ex-athletes. And I'm going to challenge you, let's put the Republicans on their heels in this community. You know, when you're in any contest, even if it's a recital, my kids are in recitals, you want to come out of that gate hitting hard. You want to let people around you know, I'm here, and you better be ready for a battle. So the next thing I'm challenging you to do is on August 30th at 10 a.m., let's get 1,000 people to walk in the fair parade. Let's put some people on notice. We're serious, and we're putting you on your heels. And so let's make that a goal, okay? Thank you very much. Our speaker tonight is Chuck Sams. Chuck grew up on the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Northeast Oregon, where he enrolled in Walla Walla and Cayuse with the Confederate Tribes of the United Indian Reservation. He currently serves on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council as one of the Oregon Council members. He most recently served under President Biden as the 19th Director of the National Park Service, the first Native American to hold that office. We couldn't be more proud of you. Thanks for serving. He received his Master of Legal Studies in Indigenous Peoples Law from the University of Oklahoma School of Law and a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration Management, Communications Leadership from Concordia University. He's also a veteran of the United States Navy, where he served as an intelligence specialist in both active and reserve duty. Let's give a warm welcome to Chuck Sams.
Good evening, my friends and relatives. My Indian name is Mockingbird with Big Heart, and I come from the place of the Big Springs and the quaking aspen on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I am Walipu, I am Cayuse, I am Walulapum, I am Walla Walla. I'm also Yankton from my grandmother's side and my paternal grandmother's side, and I'm also Kokapa and Mojave on my mother's side. I'm also French Canadian. I know it doesn't look like it. And I'm also Dutch. And I was asked and honored to be here. Thank you, Carrie, for asking me to come and be with you all tonight and to talk a little bit about my own experience here. Growing up in Northeast Oregon and in this territory, and my experience and how I got to become the National Park Service Director, which was not on my life's bingo card, to be honest. It was very much a surprise to me. But a little bit about my family history. So, you know, I'm about a 1500th generation North American citizen. I love it when my farming buddies tell me they're 5th and 6th generation. I always think it's cute. Because I even point out that on my non-Indian side, my 9th great grandfather is Joseph Larocque, who was from Frenchtown. Joseph Larocque came here in 1812, which starts to begin my National Park Service journey, and I didn't even know it. He came on the SS Beaver as part of the American Fur Trade Company. And he came into Fort Astoria, which was Fort Clatsop, and then made his journey from there in canoe to Fort Vancouver, which are both now National Historic Sites. And then from Fort Vancouver, he made his way into this territory and married Lizette Walla Walla, the daughter of Pio Pio Mox Mox. A smart man for a trader. And his great-grandson became a businessman. And I found out later on he was the middleman in the canoe. The middleman is the guy who literally sits in the middle of the canoe and makes the negotiations when you come ashore. That's where we get the business term, the middleman. My other great-grandfather was Matthew Defane, and now the name is Duffy. And Matthew came out with Captain Bonneville, Joe Meek, and Dr. Haig. And they were bringing out Narcissa Whitman's wagons and came to Willitpoo country. Matthew married Suzanne Cayuse, my other grandmother, and they also settled down in Frenchtown and here in the Walla Walla Valley. And of course, he went on and became the godfather of the Cayuse Five, who accepted responsibility for the deaths of the Whitmans. And my other grandparents are the Samses, who actually came out from the Ohio Valley in around 1862 and settled here in Walla Walla, and the Samses still live here. And it's rumored that one of my great-grandfathers actually at one time owned half of Walla Walla and lost it in a card game in a back room in downtown, which I found out is pretty true. So we used to own half this town at one point. And my family obviously before that owned the whole town. And as director at the National Park Service, when I was at the Hopewell Cultural Site in Ohio, the woman who was running the gift shop walks up and she says, "Hey, you know I'm a Sam's too." And I said, "You are?" And I said, "You wouldn't be from Richland County." She goes, "I am." I said, "That is exactly where the Samses that I'm from come to." She goes, "Really? What kind of American Indian are we?" I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. That side of the family's not. You might be, but that's not the side that's American Indian, sorry." But come to find out, there are literally hundreds of Samses all around Hopewell, which was very exciting to learn. But you know, learning and understanding who I was actually came more deeply from my native side, especially my late grandfather, Charles F. Sams Sr. And growing up on the Umatilla Indian Reservation and being on the waters of the Umatilla and its tributaries, Meacham Creek, Sculpa Creek, even here in Mill Creek, here on the Walla Walla River, and walking up and down all of these tributaries and out to the main stem of the big river, the Nichiwana as we call it. And one of my fondest and earliest memories is understanding my place as a human being and who I am as a person and what it means to be a human being. Because our stories tell us from long ago that there was a time when there were no humans on this that we know as North America. And that there was a time when the Creator was going to create this thing called human. And he called Coyote up to the tallest point of Mount Pato, which was now called Mount Adams. And he called Coyote to come up to the mountain. And when Coyote got to the top of the mountain, he told him, "I'm going to create this thing called human, but I need gifts, and I need gifts from all the other creatures on the earth. Can you do this for me? Can you take this medicine bag and go and ask for gifts?" Coyote said, "Of course I can." Put his medicine bag around the neck, and he started glissading down the mountain. Well, as he's going down the mountain, he looks up in the sky and he sees Eagle, and he yells out, "Eagle, this thing called human is coming, and Creator wants to know if you can give a gift." Eagle says, "I can give part of my eyesight, so this thing called human will be able to see the splendor of the world. This is a good gift." He puts it in the medicine bag. He continues down, and when he hits the break of the trees, he looks up and there's an owl, and he yells out to Owl the same thing. Creator's creating this thing called human, and he wants to know if you can give a gift. Owl says, "I'll give part of my hearing so he can hear the sounds of the water, the wahlee, the wind." This too is a good gift. These gifts keep piling up. As he gets into the meadow, he sees Elk, and he yells out to Elk, "Elk, this thing called human is coming. Is there a gift you can give? Creator wants to know." Elk gives part of its hide so that it will recover itself. The plant people give part of its root system so it will be able to carry its blood and nutrients throughout the body. These are all good gifts. Finally, Coyote gets down to the big river, and he's near a place what we now call Celilo Falls. And it was roaring. And he yells out over the roar of the falls as the salmon are coming back up. Salmon, this thing called human is coming. Creator wants to know if you can give a gift. Salmon popped up, eddied out, and popped its head out and says, I give 2 gifts. 2 gifts. Yes. I will give up my voice completely so it'll have a language. It will be able to speak. And 2, I will give up my body completely so it will be able to nourish itself. But before I do so, I want it to keep a promise. I want it to have a covenant that it will be our keeper. Laikanish nak nui tluma, a keeper of the salmon, but more importantly, the keeper of flora and fauna. This story is told to me for the first time when I was about 5, maybe 6, on the banks of the Sculpa Creek. It was the foundation of my understanding that I was responsible to be a good steward of these resources. That if indeed that I'm built of these things, of the natural world, that I must protect and preserve them. And so as I went off to go learn new things, I had to make sure that I was learning how all things interconnected with life. That if I was to get a good education, that my education was not to necessarily go to the specific, even though I have a very good Western education, but really to turn that paradigm upside down, and so that I went from the specific to the general. And so to that end, my grandfather shortly afterwards gave me a stone, which I still have in my medicine bag. And he said, grandson, from time to time I'm going to ask you questions from the stone, and about the stone, and I want you to answer me to the best of your ability. When you're a little kid, you don't fully understand that, and you're very nervous. But he would. He was always very gentle as we walked up and down these hills and mountains and streams and waterways along the Columbia Plateau. And he'd ask me about questions about the stone from time to time. Where do you think it came from? How do you think it was made? Is it alive? Who do you think's walked on it? Who do you think swam over it? Who do you think it's attached itself to? Do you ever think it was on dry land? If so, what kind of dry land was it on? It wasn't until I got to about late junior high school, early high school, that I started realizing that this is part of my formal education as an American Indian. Because I was learning science, I was learning math, I was learning history, I was learning an understanding of how to go from the specific to the general. How does the interconnectivity of the world work? And what is my place in that to ensure how to ensure that interconnectivity continues to thrive and not just survive on the landscape? And how humans are responsible for ensuring that we continue to ensure that flora and fauna thrive. So of course, straight out of high school, what do? I go and no, I don't get a natural resource degree, I go to the military. Why? Because I come from a long line of people who go to the military. And I went to the Navy, and I went into intelligence work. And so I'm gonna age myself here too. Yakovlevich Peruski, I was a Soviet analyst in the late 1980s. Then I went on to Middle Eastern affairs, and I ended up with the Defense Intelligence Agency on the China desk. And then I met a woman who decided that she really didn't like what I did for a living. Mostly because when I was in reserve and we were dating, and I'd come home after a long weekend or after a few weeks away, and she'd say, so what did you do? Nothing. You were gone for 2 weeks. Where were you? Away. Did you have fun? I can't really tell you. And so I went and saw some guys who said, how do you get out of this? How do you actually really leave? Because they're like the mafia, they will drag you back in. And they said, well, you need to go get a degree we don't care about and then do the opposite of that. So I went and got a business degree and worked in the environmental field. It works. And that began lifelong work doing mostly salmon and watershed restoration here in the Columbia River Basin. But I was also very fortunate enough to do work in a lot of other places. I was able to work in New York City on environmental work. And you'd be surprised, New York City does have a lot of environmental work. There's a lot of streams that have been paved and piped over that the city was working on in the 1990s to actually recapture, because they were looking at how to do ecosystem function back in the city. How do we preserve these lands that were part of a rock and island and all the other boroughs to make it back into an ecosystem function that could protect waterways to improve habitat? Eventually, I also worked in Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia and Maryland, and reestablishing the American bald eagle back into the nation's capital. It had been gone for 45 years, and we were able to reestablish it. And then after 9/11, 3 months after 9/11, New York City Parks Commissioner called me and said, the bald eagle also hasn't been here for almost 50 years. I need you to come to Ground Zero with me. And so I flew out to Washington, flew out to New York, went to Ground Zero. We talked about it, and then he said, I need you to find me and build a hack. So in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we built a hack in the cloisters up in Washington Heights. And now there are over 10 mating pairs of bald eagles in and around New York City. But the vast majority of nearly 25 years of my career in doing salmon and watershed restoration was mostly throwing rocks at the Department of Interior. I'm not joking, nearly throwing rocks at the Department of Interior. Being very angry with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with the Bureau of Land Management, with the National Park Service, with the Bureau of Reclamation, pushing for tribals' rights, pushing for community rights, pushing where states were trying to engage them as part of their sovereignty to ensure that they were fulfilling their obligations for flora and fauna. When the dams were put into the Columbia River Basin, in order for us to have a thriving and flourishing not only economy, but also for the residential needs that we have, it came at a cost to flora and fauna. And so what were the balancing needs of that? And where were those institutions, like the Bureau of Reclamation, the Corps of Engineers, and fulfilling their obligations to make sure that they were paying for those and making sure that there was a balance for that mitigation? And so you can imagine a few years ago when I got a phone call from a very nice woman named Maggie who said, hi, you don't know me, I'm with the White House Presidential Personnel Office. I'm also representing the Department of Interior. We'd like to know if you'd like to be the 19th Director of the National Park Service. I laughed at her very hard. I laughed, and she got nervous, and she said, would you please stop laughing at me? And I asked her, who put you up to this? And she said, what do you mean? I said, no, really, who put you up to this? Somebody put you up to this. And she says, no, this is really, hi, my name's Maggie. I'm with the White House Personnel Office, and I'm asking if you have any interest in being the 19th Director of the National Park Service. Oh, yes, I do. And she goes, you might know somebody who's part of the transition team. His name is Bob Anderson. And Bob has been a mentor of mine. Bob is one of the foremost legal scholars on federal Indian law and has been a strong mentor of mine. He ended up becoming the solicitor for the Department of Interior. So I called Bob and said, hey, what's going on? And he says, hey, we're tired of you throwing rocks at the building. Why don't you come on the inside? You get a front row seat to the U.S. Constitution if you want to be confirmed for an office in the federal government. And as you know, in the Constitution, it says the president may nominate, and then the Congress must consent to that nomination. Well, they get to go through your entire background. There is nothing that they do not get to know about you. And that process is very invasive, and it should be, and it really should be, because they want to make sure that they're having people that are well qualified. Well, I think they used to. Used to make sure that you're well qualified. And that process, though, you have to get through, and you're meeting with many members of Congress, discussing your qualifications and backgrounds, and then you have to have your hearing, and you get through your hearing, and then finally you get seated. And it was a good process to go through. It was an interesting process to get that front row of how the Constitution works and meeting with your members of the Senate on both sides. Fortunately for me, because I was brought up here in the Pacific Northwest and living in a rural section that has predominantly folks that are on the red side, you have to learn how to work bipartisan generally. And that we know that our neighbors are not that much different than us. And having been a lifelong Democrat, I still had friends that were Republican. And so I had a lot of bipartisan support. I was one of the few nominees in the Biden administration that got unanimous consent and when I went to go for my confirmation. And so I went for my hearing on October 18th, and 1 month later, on November 18th, I made it through Senate confirmation, and I began in December 10th, technically. I did a private swearing in, and then you get to do one with the secretary. And I was sitting in my new office, waiting to hear where that was going to happen, and her chief of staff called. And she said, Chuck, Secretary knows that you don't really like being in the office, and she would like to know if you'd like to do an outside swearing in rather than the traditional one in front of her fireplace. I was like, great. where can we go? Well, could you keep it in the district? Like, sure. So can I call you back and think about it? She said, sure. So I gave it about an hour and I called back, and Rachel's a very nice person. Rachel goes, where do you want to do it? I said, I want to do it in front of the Washington Monument. She goes, great. The communications team is going to want to know why. Can we say why? Oh, absolutely. I want them to know the Savage Indian is on the mall. It's part of the grievances of the Declaration of Independence, and we're back. Rachel said, that's cute. No, what's your second choice? I said, my second choice is the Lincoln Memorial. And she said, why? And I said, so when I was a young sailor, I took an oath of office, the same oath of office that I had taken when I became the Director of the National Park Service, to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When you take that oath of office, and I took it at age 17, you say the words, you can feel them, but you're not quite sure, what does it really mean? You get through boot camp, you get a little bit more feeling, you're learning the history of America and learning the history of your particular branch of service, of the wars our nation fought. But it really didn't hit home to me until I was in intelligence school. And while I was in intelligence school, we had a break between courses. It was nearly a 2-week break. A buddy of mine was going to get married, and so he was living in Maine. So 5 of us drove up to Maine, and we got him married over a weekend, and we sent him off on his honeymoon. The 4 of us loaded up in my buddy Watley's van, and we began a trip that was going to take us from Maine to Florida. And we decided that we were going to stop at every national park, historic site, monument, and memorial that we could. Mostly because we didn't have any money. And we could sleep in the parking lot, in the van. But also because we were just really interested in trying to get a better understanding of our history as Americans. It was the single most pivotal moment in my life of understanding what it means to be an American, what it means to live in a democracy, what it means to be part of a federal republic. For you see, I got to walk into the footsteps of those who came before the republic. I got to walk in the footsteps of the tribal people of Maine, of the Narragansett in Connecticut, of the tribal people in Virginia. I got to walk in the footsteps of the very first colonists who came from Spain and France and Holland and England. I got to walk in the revolutionaries' footsteps, whether that was in Independence Hall or on the battlefields in Massachusetts, and walk across the bridge and where the Minutemen walked. I was able to walk among the industrialists, and whether I was down in New Jersey and looking at the very first towns that were built for industrial use as America was building out its industrial might. I was able to walk into New York City and see the sites and the historic landmarks of how we built our capital and being able to become an international country. I was able to walk in the footsteps of both the North and South. That one was also very pivotal. Being on this Battle of Gettysburg was very emotional for us. Understanding brother fighting against brother. That one was interesting because we'd spent all day there and we really had wanted to go to Antietam and pay our respects to the 5,000 dead that were buried at Antietam. And so we hurriedly in the afternoon drove over to Antietam, which isn't far from Gettysburg. And we got there at around 5 o'clock. We parked the van across the street. We ran across the street, walked up through the iron gates, and as we come in, there was what we believe a ranger. He was in green and gray. And he got up and he turned to us and he says, "What are you gentlemen doing?" We told him we were on this tour and we came to pay our respects. And he said, "This park closes in 1 hour. In 1 hour, I have to shut those iron gates." I said, okay. Then he proceeded to take us on a tour. And we walked around the graves and he talked about the different regiments, the New York, the Pennsylvania, the Massachusetts, the Maine, all the different soldiers who were buried at Antietam. Then we boosted each other over the rock wall and went down to Burnside Bridge, in the Battle of Burnside Bridge. And he told a magnificent story of 2 Union captains, a Union captain and a Southern captain, who had actually attended West Point together. The Union soldier's sister married the Southern soldier's, his best friend. During the battle, as they were charging across, the Union soldier charging across Burnside Bridge, he was mortally wounded. And was brought in to the aid station of his best friend. And realizing that his best friend was not going to live, he was begging for forgiveness, the Southern gentleman, to the Union officer. The Union officer told him, "You don't have to worry about it. Tell my sister that you just did your duty and that I hold no blame. I hold no fault." And then he got up and he said, "Let's go, boys, we gotta go." We ran back up the hill, we popped over at the top of the fence, and sure enough, right at 6 p.m., out the gate we went and he shut it. It wasn't until years later that I learned that he wasn't an interpretive ranger, he wasn't even a field ranger. He actually was a maintenance staffman. As director, I learned that everywhere I go, your civil servants who are still out there in the field, whether they do administration, whether they do interpretation, whether they do natural resources, they know their park. They know their historic site. And they are deeply in love with the storytelling that goes on there. They can tell you not only the history, they can tell you the plants and the animals that are in that park, and they want to share it with you. Well, we continued our trip, and we made that trip all the way down. But the other memorable moment was when we finally got to Washington, D.C., and we climbed the steps for the very first time for me at age 19 to see the temple in which President Lincoln was sitting. And I'd loved history growing up, and I'd read a lot about Lincoln. And I really admired Lincoln, I still do, mostly because of his complexity. Most Americans know that, he barely had about between a third and fifth grade education, but he was a ferocious reader. He was self-taught, self-educated, became an attorney, and was a good attorney. Went on, of course, to become the President of the United States. But he also had complexity. He knew his weaknesses, and whatever weaknesses he had, he continued to work on them. He continued to try to figure out how to be a better person every day. But one of the complexities that I've tried to understand for me as an American Indian was the same day, on December 26th, that he signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing the slaves. He also signed the death warrant for the Dakota 38, hanging them. And I've tried to figure out for years how he reconciled that. How do you free one group of people when another group of people who are already free, you're now putting them on reserves? I like to think that had he lived, he may have been able to figure that out. Unfortunately, we know he did not. But as I climbed those steps and we looked at him and he's gazing down on us, I looked and read his second inaugural and the Gettysburg Address. Both of those stick to me to this day. And year after year, for the next 25 plus years after that, nearly 30, every time I went to Washington, I always made a trek to the Lincoln Memorial. And so I told Rachel, I would love to be sworn in under the gaze of President Lincoln. So the morning finally came, and I brought my staff, and I asked my staff, have you met the secretary yet? And they said, no, we have not met Secretary Holland. I'm like, great, everybody get your uniforms on, we're going over, we're gonna go meet Secretary Holland. So we get over there and we walk up to the steps and we're waiting in the area, and the secretary comes in with her detail, and they keep telling me, it's just supposed to be you, your staff need to meet far away. I'm like, nope, secretary wants to meet all my staff. No, sir, you need to take your staff. I'm like, nope, they're coming with me, they're my staff. And so we find out, and the secretary jumps out of the car as soon as she gets there, and she goes, Chuck, can I meet your staff? I'm like, see, told you. And she's very graciously comes and meets all the staff. Well, as we start walking our way up, I want to do it on the top landing, directly under the gaze of the president. She tells the staff, I want us to stop and do it on the second landing. And her deputy chief of staff very kindly says, oh, Director Sams wants to do it under the gaze of the president. She goes, I know, we're gonna do it on the second landing. And I'm quiet, because she's the boss. We start walking upstairs. Her comms person comes up and says, Madam Secretary, we've all set it up. It's going to be right up on top there, under the gaze of President Lincoln. She goes, oh, I heard. We're doing it on the second landing. Third person starts to walk up, and I said, hey, everybody, we're going to do it on the second landing. You shouldn't encounter your boss. So we get to the second landing, and she asks everybody to please stand away. And we stand next to each other, and it is about 8 o'clock in the morning. The sun is coming up, and it is a beautiful winter day in Washington, D.C. And she says, Chuck, on behalf of the American people, President of the United States and myself, we are charging you with the protection, preservation, and enhancement of these national monuments, memorials, and parks and historic sites all across the United States. It is your job to tell America's story fiercely, to unflinchingly find those stories to ensure every American can see themselves in their parks. Now, would you please look at your feet? I'm sorry, what did you say? She said, would you look at your feet? And I look, and I'm standing where Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And she says, Chuck, you and I are the embodiment of Dr. King's dream. We must keep his dream alive. And then I was sworn in as the 19th Director of the National Park Service. For the next 3+ years, I spent most of my life on the road. I averaged about 3 parks a month. I visited over 130 parks while I was the National Park Service Director. Spent most of my time in the field talking to staff as we laid out the vision of President Biden, the strategies that the Secretary wanted, and then the 7 points that I really wanted pushed out into the service itself. I wanted to ensure that the staff knew that my job was really to bring and ensure that they had all the resources necessary to do their job. The 1916 Organic Act is a brilliant act. It's only 2 pages long. It's less than 2 pages, really. And it charges the Secretary and the Director of the National Park Service to protect flora and fauna, cultural and natural resources on behalf of the American people. Not just now, but for future generations. Very few acts do we have talk about future generations. Very few. I could see that direct connection to what my grandfather told me. The promise that was made with salmon for flora and fauna. That we don't do this just for ourselves, we do this for 7, 8, 10, 20, 30 generations out. And that the staff are responsible for ensuring that the sites that they protect are protected for future generations. And we work towards that end. And so as I traveled around, it was amazing to me to meet with these dedicated staff. There were 20,000 of them when I was Director of the National Park Service. All over the country, large and small parks, working to tell America's story, working to tell your story, working to ensure that when you showed up in a park that you saw a reflection of yourself. And it didn't matter if you've been here for 9, 10, 12 generations, or you were just sworn in yesterday. If you were just sworn yesterday, we wanted you to come in and start building your story in a park. What's happening today? We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do as Americans. As Director, I was able to work with the Antiquities Act on behalf of the President on 5 different sites, telling a more fierce story. We were able to tell Emmett Till's story from Chicago to Mississippi. It's the first large park that went multi-state that we've ever had, that tells the story all the way from Chicago, all the way to Mississippi. We told Frances Perkins' story. Secretary Perkins, who was the longest serving secretary, 12 years, I don't know how she did it, under President Roosevelt, for the Secretary of Labor. We told the race riots in Springfield, Illinois. We told about the Carlisle and the Indian education and the boarding school initiatives. These weren't easy stories to tell, but we knew that the American people wouldn't shy away from it, because as part of who we are is that we build on our democracy. The Declaration of Independence says that we must continue to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And in doing so, we know that there are challenges along the way. It left out women. And Abigail Adams had told John, don't leave the ladies out. And yet, it's silent on women. It talks about slavery, and yet we overcame slavery and had to fight through civil rights. It does talk about the savage Indian, but the natives fought to continue to preserve their rights through treaty, through law. Didn't talk about anybody with disabilities, and yet we were able to get the 1990, the American Disabilities Act passed. These are fights we have as Americans in order to form a more perfect union. It's not easy. The National Park Service tells our stories, the good and the bad. those things that challenge us of who we are. So that when we see that reflection, and we do see the stories that are not necessarily as popular, we know and can teach our children to not ever do that again. That is not something we wish to repeat. It scares me today what we're seeing. They're looking at slashing the budget of the National Park Service by over $1 billion. $900 million of it alone that they're proposing would be for direct operations of the parks. That would affect 330 national park sites around the country. They're looking at a massive reduction of staff. They're already at 13%. If they get what they want from the Supreme Court, they will cut another 1,500 staff. That will be over a 25% reduction. The staff are already 10% lower than where they were in 2010. That means 35% overalls from where they were in 2010. And we were rebuilding the staff when I was director of the National Park Service in cooperation with our friends on the right. So I don't understand where they're at now and why they're doing this. We have a chance, as you've seen now, most recently, they put a QR code up, and they're now asking for Americans to fill out if they think that there's anything disparaging in the national parks that are counter to the American value system, or that are disparaging about Americans. It's very strange to me because the National Park Service goes through a very tough and rigorous academic review before they ever print anything that goes on the placards about what's taught. That is one of the most impressive things I've ever witnessed. Not only do the historians within the National Park Service review it, they send it out for peer review to a number of academics and independent parties to ensure the accuracy of it. And more importantly, when new scholarship arrives, they review that and update it in a timely manner to ensure that new scholarship is out there as we learn and get new information that we haven't seen before. All of this is extremely important of who we are as Americans so that we can tell a more fuller and true story, because we don't shy away from the truth, and we should never shy away from the truth. Being the 19th director, being your director, was an honor of a lifetime. It was an opportunity to go and serve all across this country and to serve along some of the finest Americans that I've ever met. People who were born naturally as American citizens, people who were naturalized citizens, and folks who had come here, people who wore the green and gray uniform day in and day out, who were willing to do the backbreaking work, who were willing to do more with less in order to ensure that they were protecting flora and fauna, that they were protecting American history on our behalf. We can only ensure that continues by voicing our concerns with our government, by standing up to ensure that our history isn't erased, that our history isn't changed, that our history isn't glossed over. The job came with a lot of fun, came with a lot of perks. Of course, there was a moment where I found myself sitting in the White House and found out that I was the chair of the White House Preservation Committee, with President Lincoln looking over me in the state dining room as I'm sitting there going, how the did I get here? I'm a kid who grew up on the reservation in public housing at one point. I don't know how I got here, now I'm in this public housing. This is weird. And these are my renters. As we went around the room and everybody came up, these were some of the finest academics and professionals in textiles and 17th century art, 18th century furniture making. It was pretty intimidating. And when it finally got to me and I introduced myself, I said, I just want to make very clear that this isn't my expertise. If there's a salmon issue, I'm your guy. If you want to put a waterway right through the middle of the White House, I'm your guy. If you want to make this a watershed, I can do that. If the chef wants help on how to prepare salmon, I can help him. Dr. Biden was very, very, very kind. She's the honorary co-chair, and she got up and she reached over and grabbed my hand and said, Joe and I are just so pleased that you volunteered to join the administration. I want to leave you with this. One of the other stops we made was at Independence Hall, coming down, and really got a very good talk about the Continental Congress and the ending of the Continental Congress in September of 1787. And as director, I was able to go back there and I was reminded, of course, of Elizabeth Willing Powell's question to Ben Franklin. Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? And he replied, a republic, if we can keep it. Thank you.
you, sir. That was sublime.
Okay.
And inspiring. In closing, I want to thank you again, everybody, for coming. And the silent auction is closed. I should have said that about half an hour ago, but anyway, it's closed. And thank you for everybody who bid. I can only encourage you, like every other one of our speakers, to continue and even extend your political action. Your contributions make our work possible. Your contributions enabled us to keep the ticket prices for tonight accessible. And your contributions allowed us to help our endorsed candidates over the years. We went from $500 maybe to one or two thousands of dollars in 24 to every single candidate. We invite you to drop in any Saturday morning between 9 and noon for the Resistance Cafe. Come and have coffee, chat with us informally, vent. You'll have a lot of friends there. We've had as many as 60 people a Saturday morning, many of whom were new to the party. That's at 38 East Main on the ground floor, the same building as Book and Game. The party meets monthly, second Tuesday of the month at the Walla Walla Public Schools Boardroom, 6:30 to 8, and we usually have a program at 6:30. These are hybrid meetings, so there's a Zoom option. And get on our mailing list if you're not already there by becoming a member. Be a member of the party. You don't have to pay dues. Of course, we encourage that. But you don't have to. Get on the list and go to WallaWallaDemocrats.com, our website, and click on Get Involved. We welcome your donations. We need your donations. Those of you who are giving already, thank you, thank you, thank you. Those of you who are giving monthly, keep up the good work. We take checks. People at the registration table can accept your gifts. There's a QR code on the back for those of you who find that convenient. And on the website, click on Get Involved. There's a donate button, and do it that way. And we will be in touch. Thank you, everybody. Have a safe trip home, and thank you so much. Good night.